In the final days of World War II, as cities fell silent and the fighting slowed, another struggle remained, one far from the battlefield. Hungry children stood on the streets, watching soldiers pass by with food they were not allowed to share. Orders were clear, no exceptions. For the American troops, this was a different kind of test, not of strength, but of conscience. Then, everything changed when one voice spoke. That voice belonged to George S. Patton, and what followed became a moment that revealed the human side of war. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and support our history community. And don't forget to comment. By 1945, much of Europe had been devastated by years of conflict. Cities were damaged, supply systems had collapsed, and civilians struggled to find even the most basic necessities. Among the most vulnerable were children. Many had lost families. Others wandered the streets searching for food wherever they could find it. As Allied forces moved through these areas, they encountered scenes that were difficult to ignore. Soldiers carried rations, limited, carefully measured supplies meant to sustain their units, but strict orders had been given. Food was not to be distributed freely. These rules existed for a reason. Supplies were limited, and maintaining order in unstable regions was critical. Commanders feared that uncontrolled distribution could lead to chaos or shortages for troops still engaged in operations. Yet for the soldiers on the ground, the situation was deeply personal. They could see the hunger, they could see the need, and every day, they were forced to walk past it. This created a silent conflict between duty and compassion. And as days passed, that conflict grew harder to ignore. As American units advanced across Europe during World War II, the contrast between military, order, and civilian suffering became more visible each day. In towns recently secured, soldiers encountered children waiting quietly along roadsides, watching, hoping, but rarely approaching. The orders remained clear. Rations were to be controlled. Distribution outside official channels was discouraged. For commanders, this was about stability. Large groups gathering around soldiers could create confusion, strain supplies, and complicate already fragile situations. But on the ground, the reality felt different. Soldiers carried food in their packs, simple items that could mean everything to someone who hadn't eaten properly in days, and yet they were expected to hold back. Some followed orders without question. Others struggled internally. A few, in quiet moments, made small choices, sharing when they could, quickly and discreetly without drawing attention. These actions were not part of official policy. They were personal decisions, moments where humanity met discipline. Still, the tension remained, because for every small act of kindness, there was the risk of consequence. Rules existed for a reason, and breaking them, even for compassion, could not be taken lightly. Then, as reports and experiences from the field reached higher command, the situation began to draw attention, and soon, a decision would be made that changed everything. As reports from the field continued during World War II, the situation reached higher levels of command. Stories of hungry civilians, especially children, were no longer isolated observations. They became a pattern that could not be ignored. Among those who became aware of this reality was George S. Patton, known for his strict discipline and strong leadership. Patton understood the importance of order, but he also understood the broader impact of decisions made during wartime. When faced with a situation, he recognized a difficult balance, maintaining control while acknowledging human need. Accounts suggest that guidance from leadership began to shift. The approach towards civilians, particularly vulnerable groups, was reconsidered. The rigid line between soldiers and those in need started to soften. For the troops, this change mattered. It gave them clarity. It reduced the internal conflict many had been feeling. Instead of acting in secrecy, they could respond with a sense of responsibility, still careful, still measured, but no longer completely restricted. What followed were small but meaningful actions, carefully shared rations, moments of relief for those who had been waiting, and a gradual shift in atmosphere. The war had not yet fully ended, but in these moments, something else began to emerge. A sense that even in the aftermath of conflict, humanity still had a place. As World War II came to an end, the scenes across Europe slowly began to change. Cities started rebuilding, supply lines improved, and relief efforts expanded. But for many, the memory of those difficult days remained, especially the moments when help felt just out of reach. For the soldiers, the experience left a lasting impression. They had followed orders, they had maintained discipline, but they had also witnessed the human cost of war in its most vulnerable form. The shift in approach, encouraged by leaders like George S. Patton, allowed them to act with both responsibility and compassion. It didn't change the war's outcome, but it changed how those final moments were remembered. For the children, even the smallest gesture meant everything. A piece of bread, a shared ration, a moment of kindness in a time of uncertainty. These were not grand events recorded in battle reports. They were quiet acts, often unnoticed but deeply meaningful. History often focuses on victories, strategies, and leaders. But stories like this remind us of something equally important: that even in times defined by conflict, individual choices can reflect something greater than orders alone. Because sometimes, the most powerful actions in war are not about fighting, but about choosing humanity when it matters most.